All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Happy to welcome back today, friend of the show, the Bulwarks, Will Saletan. Will, welcome back to the news.
Thanks, Matt. There's always news to cover.
There always is, and we're talking after Super Tuesday, after Nikki Haley has announced that she is finally dropping out of the race. And I wanted to play a couple of clips and get your response. I'm going to start with Donald Trump on Super Tuesday.
A great Republican Party with tremendous talent, and we want to have unity, and we're going to have unity, and it's going to happen very quickly.
All right. That happened very quick. But he wants unity. He says it's going to happen. This is no. Let's go to Nikki Haley and her comments on Wednesday.
It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond it who did not support him. And I hope he does that. At its best, politics is about bringing people into your cause, not turning them away. And our conservative cause badly needs more people. This is now his time for choosing.
What do you think of that, Will?
Well, look, let me start first of all with Trump. That line about unity, that's what you're seeing in the Trump campaign and in Trump's speeches is two things. One is Trump's advisors. He's got smart people around him. He actually has a better run campaign this time than in any previous election. So when Trump says things like, we need to unite the party, we need to all come together, that's Trump's advisors talking. But then there's the real Trump who lives for spite and feuding. And, we can talk more about the statement that he issued on Wednesday morning. But so there's the Tuesday night Trump and the Wednesday morning Trump. What Haley said is super interesting because the other candidates who ran against Trump, when they dropped out, in that moment endorsed Donald Trump. In that moment, they said, I'm throwing my support to Donald Trump. And Nikki Haley could have done that, and she didn't. And she said, basically, he's got to earn it. Now, Matt, I am not a big Nikki Haley fan. I'm not going to bet anything I own on Nikki Haley's courage. I'm not going to bet on her holding out. I believe in my soul she will endorse Donald Trump. But it is notable that she didn't do it right away. And so we'll see. We'll see what he does and how she responds.
There's something about her. I have this love-hate relationship with her. Like sometimes she nails it and I'm a believer. And then this speech, like this sort of sing-songy nature of the speech and part of it's the calmness. I'm like, okay, this is the guy who made fun of your husband and implied that he was in Africa, that he voluntarily left the country to serve in a dangerous, military deployment to get away from you. And you're like, we will see when the time is right if Donald Trump will if he will finally rise to the have you not been paying attention these last 8 years?
Matt, hold on. I think you're not being fair to Trump. So Michael Haley left the United States for a reason, right? Which was to serve his country. In Donald Trump's defense, he's never served his country, and he really doesn't understand what that means. So for Donald Trump, you have to understand that the only reason that Trump can conceive of a husband leaving during the wife's campaign is because he hates the wife or is embarrassed to be with the wife. So that is Trump projecting his empty little soul onto Michael Haley. Anyway, it is a completely bizarre spectacle, and Trump just constantly undermines himself with this stuff. Can I ask you a question though?
You may. This is a dialogue, my friend.
Your reaction to Nikki Haley I find super interesting, and I would like to hear how you feel about her compared to the way you feel or felt about Chris Christie.
Well, let me go even further back to someone we call Marco Rubio. I thought that's where you were going. I was a true believer in Marco Rubio. I really liked Marco Rubio, and I saw him as like this Jesus meets JFK meets Ronald Reagan. This young, exciting, optimistic, conservative who believes in, the right to rise and human flourishing and all this stuff. So that was the Matt that used to believe in things. Um, that guy's dead. Like that guy no longer exists. Chris Christie, he had a whole bunch of problems too. Will, as you know, he's the first guy. He knifed Marco Rubio, destroyed him. Then he endorsed Donald Trump and stuck with him for 4 years, something like that. And so when Christie ran his campaign, he was tougher than Nikki Haley, but he also had a lot of baggage. So, none of these people are perfect. And, again, I applaud the way Christie ran. I think he was a net positive, but also got issues with him too.
Yeah. Okay. So because I hadn't thought about your Rubio angle, see, that's a whole other thing. That's like, now I'm like asking a Philadelphia fan about Boston. So there's the whole, what Christie did to Rubio was amazing. Not only because he stabbed Rubio, which was totally gratuitous. Rubio was the only guy who had a shot at taking out Trump at that point, I think. So
it was devastating. This happened right before the New Hampshire primary, and Rubio was actually surging at that moment. I think he had a real shot to win New Hampshire, and that would have deprived Trump of winning Iowa and New Hampshire. Because remember, Ted Cruz won Iowa.
Right.
If Rubio wins New Hampshire, who knows? I'm not saying Trump is finished, but he's 0-2 at that point. And I don't know if you remember this, but and this is apropos of nothing, except I want to remind everyone that Jeff Rowe, who is the campaign manager or general consultant for Ted Cruz, reportedly was conspiring, I think, with Corey Lewandowski of the Trump campaign to help Trump and to defeat Rubio. Now, I have no idea where Chris Christie fits into this. He was the one who really dealt the lethal blow there in that debate. But who knows? The whole world could be different if Chris Christie hadn't done that.
Okay, so I'll give you this. So Chris Christie, that was the last moment anybody in the Republican Party really had until Trump's second impeachment to stick the knife in it, right? I mean, that was the chance they had to smother Trump. You're right, Cruz had beaten him. And so Christie did one of the worst things historically that happened in the rise of Trump, right? He was one man had a chance to play a role in history, and he did, and he played it on the bad side. So I'm totally with you on that.
And then he endorsed Trump.
Right. Well, no, he stuck it into, but that was it actually. He was the first guy who threw his support to Trump and said, this businessman who seems kind of crazy and has done no political experience, a legend of the Republican Party, I'm going to stand behind. I mean, he gave him the establishment support that Trump desperately needed at that moment. Okay. So I'm with you on all that. However, in this campaign, I feel like the Christie Haley comparison is super fascinating. Like Christie was the guy who just let it all hang out. He was, I'm going to say what I think. I'm not going to worry about Trump. And he said what a lot of other Republicans thought, right? Trump's completely unfit to be president. He's dangerous. He has no respect for the Constitution or anything else. And Nikki Haley was the sort of careful, not quite going to say that version, right? And so the way that she exited the race just felt a little weak to me.
It did to me too. But what's weird is what you're saying about Nikki was true up until she lost in New Hampshire. And then the night of New Hampshire, she like flipped a switch and started really going after Trump aggressively and ran a really tough campaign after it didn't matter electorally. I'm not going to say it didn't matter at all, but it didn't matter electorally. And now with this speech, on Wednesday, again, it felt more like the wishy-washy Nikki to me a little bit.
Yeah. It's funny you brought up her turn in New Hampshire, which was totally fascinating. I think it was my buddy JVL who pointed this out. When Nikki Haley made her turn and she said, what really happened, of course, is she got rid of Christie. Christie drops out, and now she gets the one-on-one. And once she gets the one-on-one, she changes her style. But what she said was one of the greatest things Nikki Haley's ever said. Classic Nikki Haley. Now I'm going to start telling the truth about Trump. Well, It's like,
Did she
okay,
really
so
say that?
she said if he's going to lie about me, I'm going to tell the truth about him. She really did say, you can look it up several times, I'm going to start telling the truth about him. So she's a phony, but at the same time, you and I would agree, she had very important policy differences with Trump, like, standing with America's allies in Ukraine and Taiwan and everywhere else. And those things matter, right? So
Yeah.
even if she's a phony, like a lot of other politicians, it matters, whether the Speaker of the House was Jim Jordan or Mike Johnson matters. One guy, weak as he is, actually believes in Ukraine, and the other guy doesn't. So even when someone is a phony, as I think Mike Johnson is in a lot of ways, these policy differences matter. So I'm in that respect, I'm sorry that Nikki Haley's gone, because we're just left with Trump.
But there may be more. I'm going to play this clip. This is Karl Rove on the night of Super Tuesday on Fox News.
Ought to be concerned about unifying the Republican Party, because as we see in the in these states, a third of the vote in Virginia, 43% of the vote in Massachusetts going to Nikki Haley, a quarter of the vote in North Carolina. Maine has now dropped down to about a quarter of the vote, but it was 31% for Nikki Haley. Vermont, 48%. There's still some work to be done to unify the Republican Party, and that's going to depend a lot on his tone tonight and whether or not he stops doing things like calling her bird brain.
Bird brain. So, Will, what do you say? I mean, some of the people who voted for Nikki are Democrats. Some of the people who voted for Nikki are Republicans who will vote for Trump. But there's got to be a certain percentage, at least half the people in Iowa, I recall, and I think about even more than half the people in South Carolina who voted for Nikki said they would never vote for Trump, ever. And so there must be some percentage of people who ought to be Republicans who Trump will not be getting. Maybe unless Nikki, I don't even know if her endorsing would matter. Does she control those votes? I don't know. What do you think?
Okay, so I have looked at a lot of exit polls on this stuff, and let's talk about that. But I'm dying to talk about Trump's Truth Social post right after Haley dropped out. So, but we can get to that later if you want. The exit polls, I've been looking at. I'm a little skeptical of Rove's numbers there, because I believe he's giving you the numbers of all the people, percentages of all the people who voted in these Republican primaries. And that makes, so you get things like 31, 48, you start getting large percentages of people who didn't vote for Trump, who voted for Haley. But as you point out, a lot of those people are in crossover Democrats or left-leaning independents, that kind of thing. So I was trying to filter for Republicans only, which you can do in these are numbers in terms of the whole electorate, and then you filter the exit poll for self-identified Republicans. Trying to filter out some of those people who are infiltrating the primary. And basically, I won't bore you with all the numbers, but what I'm seeing is somewhere between 10 and 25% of the Republican voters in the Republican primaries were saying things like Donald Trump is not fit to be not mentally fit to be president, or Donald Trump would not be fit if he's convicted of a crime. They're saying that Joe Biden was legitimately elected. They're saying that.
Wait a second. That's crazy talk, Will. They think Joe Biden was legitimately elected? That actually is the litmus test, I think.
That is incredibly, that is a litmus test. So Matt, I'm looking at the numbers. So there have been 6 states in the whole primary season where that question has been asked in the exit poll. And again, among self-identified Republicans, the highest percentage who said yes, Joe Biden was legitimately elected, 31% in California, 32% in New Hampshire, 31% in California, and it goes all the way down to 21% in North Carolina. So, that's fewer than a third of self-identified Republicans who voted in the primary will cop to this basic truth about the election. And you're totally right. It's a statement of allegiance to Trump. They, what was the line? Doug Burgum, who was one of the, also ran candidates, who was now bidding for a Trump cabinet spot, he was on CNN on Tuesday night, and they asked him, what was the question? Was it whether either they asked him whether Biden legitimately won, or what he thought about January 6th, and he totally dodged. He would not answer the question because, as you point out, these are now litmus tests. To speak the truth about any of this is to confess your disloyalty to Trump in his eyes. Just amazing. It's a factual statement.
It is. So, do you have a sense? Just, I want to drill down on it. So, like, what percentage of the Republican primary electorate are actually Republicans who may not vote for Trump?
Yeah, I'm going to say the high side is 25, but really
Okay.
the numbers really 20 is the high end ballpark. And I'm talking about people who are in play in any way. I'm saying
Right.
the other 80 are out of play. When they ask people how you would feel if Trump wins the nomination, you get like this was New Hampshire and South Carolina. 19% in both states said they were dissatisfied, and those went almost all for Haley. In North Carolina on Tuesday night was the only state where you could break down this number in the exit poll. Otherwise, the samples were too small. 18% said they would not necessarily vote Republican regardless of the nominee. But Matt, that broke mostly for Trump. So, I mean, again, that's a very pro-Trump state among the states that were polled. But that means basically you're talking about 8% max are saying they would not necessarily vote for. It's a small number. So if you take these polls that we're looking at, like New York Times Siena, which is what, a 5-point spread, and even if you got all 8% that were in play, that's not doing the job, especially when Trump, as we know from 2016, starts out with like a 2% margin in the Electoral College. In other words, Trump lost to Hillary Clinton by 2 points and won the Electoral College. So
Wait, so you're saying that the Nikki Haley vote does not, even if a significant portion of Republicans who supported Nikki Haley in these primaries, if they just sit on their hands, they don't vote at all, that you don't think that's enough to overcome kind of the built-in institutional advantages that Trump has if you look at the current polling?
I think that there's going to have to be other changes. There has to be other movement in the polls, which there could be. Look, let's take up something very simple. The Gaza war ends. Israel gets done with it. I mean, I think they're close to being done with what they can do. That ends. Then you got a lot of disgruntled Democrats, young people who are pissed off at Biden, who, over the course of the next several months go like, all right, I didn't like that, but that's no longer front and center. I'm going to, I got to come out and vote against Trump. You move some numbers that way. Then you add in, I do think we absolutely meaning the anti-Trump forces, need some of these Haley Republicans. And Donald Trump's doing what he can to help us. So can we talk about that, or do you want to?
Well, you mentioned Truth Social. I have not seen, because I don't have Truth Social, so I didn't see this. But do tell.
Okay, so we saw you were playing the consultant version of Trump, right? Unity, let's all come together, right? So Haley spoke at 10 o'clock sharp on Wednesday morning. She came out, I watched this. She spoke, Matt, for 4.5 minutes, right? So she's done at 10:04:30. Donald Trump issues a post on Truth Social at 10:05 a.m. She's just finished speaking. Of course, he's typing this. Maybe he wrote this before she spoke, but nevertheless, everybody in the political universe knew that Haley's campaign had announced she was going to be speaking at 10 o'clock. The word was out. She was going to drop out. Any sane person, you, me, any of our friends, would sit there and wait and say, what does she have to say? Right? And then maybe I'll respond to what she has to say. Trump has this all ready to go, and he hits the send button right after she's finished. Here's what he said. Nikki Haley got trounced last night in record-setting fashion. So let's humiliate her. He goes on, despite the fact that Democrats, for reasons unknown, are allowed to vote in Vermont and various other Republican primaries. She won one state. She won DC.
One too many. One too many, as far as he's concerned.
And he cannot let this go. He just cleaned up. The party is all behind him. There's this one state. You and I know if this happened to you, you'd be like, oh my God, I'm like running away with this thing. This is awesome. And here's my chance to congratulate my losing opponent on the one state she won. No, he's like, she didn't win that really. She won that with Democrat votes. And then he goes on to say her money came from radical left Democrats, as did many of her voters. Then he says, I hope she stays in and fights it out till the end. Like he wants to fight with her. She's just, and he knew there's no way that Donald Trump's people didn't tell him before he sent this, you know, she's speaking at 10 o'clock. You might want to wait and say something gracious. But the man is just incapable. Just, this is amazing.
You know what this reminds me of a little bit is, in 1984, Ronald Reagan won 49 states, but he lost Minnesota. And Ed Rollins, the campaign manager, said, and they never let me forget that I lost Minnesota, which was Walter Mondale's home state. But to show you, and I don't think this speaks to Ronald Reagan himself, but to show you sort of the pettiness of this, I think it was probably Ed Rollins, but some of the Reagan team alleged that they could have won Minnesota. But Nancy Reagan insisted that they spend money in California that they didn't need to spend because she was so afraid of losing their home state. But the fact that they have an excuse for losing Minnesota tells you all you need to know about the competitive nature and the pettiness of politics. There's a pony in there somewhere, Will.
I had forgotten, Matt. I am so Trump deranged. I had forgotten that there existed such political pettiness before Donald Trump. I certainly don't associate it with Ronald Reagan. Like, I'm one of these liberals who has like made friends with a bunch of neocons and Reaganites. And like, in my memory now, I've done what voters have done with the Trump presidency. I've done it with Reagan. Like, oh, he wasn't so bad. He believed in things like the Constitution and limited government and supporting America's allies, and that seems kind of quaint in retrospect. So it's hard for me to believe that the Reagan campaign was petty, but yeah, you're reporting.
I'm a big Reagan fan, but mistakes were made. And I think that was more the operatives probably. But no, it's funny. I'm reading a book right now about lobbying. It's about how these four different lobbyists, like one is Boggs of Patton Boggs, for example. These four different lobby firms changed American politics in the last 30 years. The book's not out yet. And it really has reminded me of how bad things were before Trump too. Like there's a lot, like some of the stuff that we're going through now is certainly novel, but there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
Anyway, before I let you go, I want to play you this clip. I played this for Bill Scher during our DMZ conversation, but it is interesting, right? So, the big knock against Joe Biden is obviously that he's old and questions about his cognitive ability and all of that. And I started hearing people on the left talk about how Donald Trump is also showing signs of, cognitive impairment. And there's been a drumbeat of this in the last week or two. Comedy shows, never conservative outlets, progressive sites. And I was very skeptical of this because it seemed to me like, okay, the Democrats have figured out that they can't replace Biden. They can't fix Biden. So they have to pretend that Trump is just as bad in this area. Now, Trump's much worse in other areas, but that Trump is just as bad. And I was very skeptical, but I've been hearing some of these clips and I'm starting to come around. And I'm going to play you. This is a very short, quick clip. It won't last long, but this is maybe the one that made me, because, Will, you've heard Trump is confusing Nikki Haley with Nancy Pelosi. Trump is confusing Biden with Obama. But the clip I'm about to play, it's a very short one, but this is the one that I find the most humorous.
We are a nation that just recently heard that Saudi Arabia and Russia will repeat.
I'm sorry. I just find that so good. Here, let me play it one more time. I'm sorry. I don't get a lot of humor. Let's just. This is really great.
We are a nation that just recently heard that Saudi Arabia and Russia will repeat.
And what makes it so funny is that music is actually from the rally. That's not just in the clip. That was
Right.
actually his background music.
Right.
So what do you say to that?
Well, he's not actually screwing up. I mean, that's not a cognitive moment. That's him looking at the prompter and getting lost. But the classic Trump move is when he screws up, he has to invent a story about how he didn't really screw up because he's so fragile. His ego is so weak that he can't admit that, right? So the story that Trump comes up with for each of these gaffes is just funny to watch, the way your brain sort of like invents something. Like the one he did one for Nancy Pelosi, and what was the one about Pelosi and Haley?
It was what he said. He was talking about Nikki Haley, and he said she was in charge of security on January 6th.
But the story, I can't remember. He came up afterwards with some story about how he hadn't really screwed up.
Well, I remember him saying that, like, in my mind, they're the same person, so I just equate them together.
Yeah, he always fabricates. It's because the essence of Donald Trump is lying. So he loves to he comes up with a lie. I don't actually think, well, a couple things about the cognitive stuff. Trump is having more cognitive moments because he's getting older, and you can actually see the change over time. He's not as bad as Biden at the forgetting stuff. Joe Biden is just a little bit older than Trump, and people age differently. So again, for people who are getting pissed off, I'm just talking about forgetting things, little small cognitive, loopholes, flaws. They're worse for Biden than they are for Trump. And I think they're going to get worse for Trump as he gets closer to Biden's age. Having said that, in the big picture about cognitive problems, the fact that Joe Biden occasionally screws up and says, say, Ukraine when he means to say Gaza, as he did this past week, is nothing compared to the cognitive problem that Donald Trump has with reality. Donald Trump is fundamentally delusional. There are a lot of people, and you may be one among them, Matt. I don't know. A lot of folks believe that Donald Trump continues to lie about having lost the 2020 election and other stuff. I don't actually believe Trump is lying most of the time. I believe Trump is delusional, that he's incapable of absorbing the information. And there's going to be there is evidence in the January 6th committee report, in the federal indictment. There's lots of testimony from people who spoke to Donald Trump, who worked for Donald Trump. They all explained to him the stuff about the fraud. He was incapable of absorbing it. He refused to absorb it. That is a much more dangerous cognitive problem.
Not a lie if you believe it's true.
There you go. There you go. So I would be comforted if I thought Trump were lying about that stuff. I don't believe he is. And Trump's inability, his refusal to accept reality about something as fundamental as that the voters voted him out, and then his attempt to use political violence to stay in power, having refused to accept that reality, that is 1,000 times more dangerous than any cognitive problem Joe Biden has or will have in the next 4 years.
On that happy note, always a pleasure. Anything you want to plug or that I should have mentioned?
Be looking for this piece in the Bulwark about the exit polls and the Haley vote and what Democrats and Biden can do to bring those people in.
Very good. Always a pleasure. Will Saletan, thank you for coming back on the news.
Thanks for having me, Matt.